The entire ballroom fell silent when the billionaire suddenly stepped onto the dance floor and raised a trembling hand. "Where did you get that handkerchief?" The music faded into an uneasy hush as hundreds of guests turned to stare at the young waiter standing in the center of the floor. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Champagne glasses hovered in midair, and every whisper in the room seemed to vanish at once. In the billionaire's hand was a small, faded blue handkerchief, worn with age, its corners carefully stitched with two simple initials. Yay! The waiter froze. Only minutes earlier, many of the same people staring at him now had been laughing at him. Some had even mocked him quietly when he walked onto the dance floor and did something no one else in the entire ballroom had dared to do. He had asked the billionaire's scarred daughter to dance. Now her father, Graham Armitage, one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, was staring at him like he had just uncovered a ghost from the past. The young waiter took a slow breath. "My squad leader gave it to me," he said quietly. The silence in the room deepened. Because Graham Armitage's brother, Elliot Armitage, had died years ago during a military mission overseas. And until this moment, no one had ever known exactly what happened during his final hours. But before we continue, imagine being in that room for a second. A poor waiter standing in the middle of a billionaire's gala while the most powerful man in the building demands answers about a handkerchief from his dead brother. If a moment like that had unfolded right in front of you, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy powerful stories about courage, kindness, and unexpected moments that change lives, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because stories like this prove that sometimes the smallest decisions can reshape everything. Because to understand how a waiter ended up holding the final memory of a fallen hero, you have to go back to the beginning of that night. The Grand View Hotel ballroom shimmered with quiet luxury. Towering crystal chandeliers spilled warm golden light across polished marble floors, and a string orchestra played soft instrumental music near the stage. Wealthy investors, executives, and celebrities filled the room, laughing easily as servers moved between them with trays of sparkling wine. It was the annual Armitage Corporation Gala, one of the most prestigious business events in the city. Invitations were rare, security was tight, and nearly everyone in attendance belonged to a world defined by power and money. Among the dozens of staff working the event was a young waiter named Jace Miller. At 28 years old, Jace had already lived a life built on discipline and long hours. His black vest and pressed white shirt blended perfectly with the rest of the serving staff, making him almost invisible to the people he worked around. But the truth was that Jace's life outside that ballroom looked very different from the glamorous world he was serving. During the day, he worked at a small auto repair shop across town, the kind of place where the smell of motor oil soaked permanently into your clothes. At night, he delivered food across the city to earn extra money. And on weekends, he picked up shifts working private events like this one. Every dollar he earned went into a small savings account. Not for luxury, not for comfort, but for a dream. Jace wanted to enroll in auto mechanics school and eventually open his own garage, a place where honest work mattered more than connections and reputation. But tuition wasn't cheap, and Jace had learned long ago that dreams built slowly were the ones that lasted. So he worked, quietly, relentlessly, one shift at a time. As he carried a tray through the ballroom that evening, something unusual caught his attention. Across the room, near the tall windows overlooking the glowing city skyline, one table stood strangely empty. At that table sat a single woman, Isa Armitage, the daughter of Graham Armitage himself. In a room full of people eager to impress the billionaire host, it seemed impossible that his own daughter would be sitting alone. Yet she was. Jace noticed something else too. Guests passed by her table often, but they rarely stopped for long. Conversations ended quickly. Some people smiled politely before moving on, while others avoided looking at her altogether. When Isa turned slightly, the reason became clear. A visible scar ran along the left side of her face. It wasn't grotesque, but it was impossible to ignore. Several years earlier, Isa had survived a serious accident that left the mark behind. The physical injury healed, but the attention it brought had slowly pushed her away from public life. Tonight she was attending her father's gala, yet even here she seemed isolated. Jace watched quietly from across the room. Years of working service jobs had taught him something important about people. When you spend enough time observing from the background, you began to notice emotions others ignored. He saw the way Isa kept her gaze lowered. He noticed the way her shoulders tightened whenever someone walked too close. Most of all, he recognized the look of someone who had grown used to being left alone. Then the orchestra shifted into a slow romantic piece. Couples began moving toward the dance floor. Elegant gowns brushed across the marble floor, while polished shoes stepped carefully to the rhythm. But Isa remained seated. No one approached her. No one asked. Jace stood still for a moment, weighing the decision forming in his mind. Stepping out of line during a high-profile event like this could easily get him fired. But something inside him refused to walk away. He gently placed his tray on a nearby table and crossed the ballroom. Several guests noticed immediately. A waiter approaching the CEO's daughter? Isa looked up when he stopped beside her. Her expression held the quiet surprise of someone who had not expected to be addressed at all. Jace smiled politely. Would you like to dance? For a moment, she simply stared at him. Nearby guests exchanged amused glances. One man chuckled softly behind his glass. But Jace remained calm, his hand extended in a simple invitation. No pity, no awkwardness, just kindness. After a long pause, Isa slowly stood and placed her hand in his. They stepped onto the dance floor together, and the orchestra continued playing as if nothing unusual had happened. At first, Isa's movements were hesitant. Years of avoiding attention had made her cautious in public spaces. But Jace danced naturally, guiding the steps without drawing attention to her. They spoke quietly as they moved. Gradually, her shoulders relaxed. Then, unexpectedly, Isa laughed. It was a small sound, but unmistakably genuine. Across the ballroom, Graham Armitage noticed immediately. He had been speaking with investors near the stage when he saw his daughter dancing. For a moment, he didn't recognize the man she was with. But seeing Isa smile stopped him cold. It had been years since he had seen that expression on her face. He watched closely as the dance continued. Then something small slipped from the waiter's vest pocket. A square of cloth fluttered silently to the floor. Jace didn't notice. Isa didn't notice. But Graham did. He walked slowly toward the dance floor and picked up the handkerchief. The moment he saw the embroidered initials, the color drained from his face. Yay, his brother's initials. And that is when the music stopped. The ballroom fell silent, and Graham Armitage asked the question that brought the entire evening to a standstill. Where did you get that handkerchief? Jace turned toward him slowly. The memory behind that small piece of cloth was not something he had expected to revisit that night. Your brother gave it to me, he said. The room held its breath. Graham's voice was quiet now. My brother died overseas 8 years ago. Jace nodded. I know. And then he told them the story of a patrol in the mountains, an ambush in the darkness, and a squad leader who refused to leave one of his men behind. He told them how Elliot Armitage had carried him to safety under gunfire, how he had pressed the handkerchief into Jace's hand before returning to the fight, and how his final words had been a simple message for the brother he loved. For the first time since Elliot's death, Graham Armitage finally understood how his brother had spent his last moments. Standing in the middle of a glittering ballroom, holding a worn piece of cloth that had survived a battlefield, the billionaire realized something profound. The man in front of him was not just a waiter. He was living proof of his brother's courage. Graham looked around the silent room, then back at Jace. What are you doing working here? He asked. Jace answered honestly. Saving for auto mechanic school. The billionaire nodded slowly. Then he did something no one in the room expected. You start at my company next month, Graham said. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And your tuition, he continued. I'll take care of that. Jace tried to protest, but Graham shook his head. This isn't charity, he said firmly. It's respect. Later that night, the music returned, conversations resumed, and the gala continued. But the atmosphere had changed completely, because everyone in that room had witnessed something far more valuable than wealth. They had seen kindness cross social lines. They had seen courage remembered. And they had seen how a single moment, one simple invitation to dance, had brought closure to a grieving family and opened a new future for someone who never expected it. Sometimes the smallest acts carry the greatest power. All it takes is one person brave enough to reach out.